Chapter 1. The Summons of the Crimson Court. The winds of Sylvania shrieked like tortured souls, twisting the mist into clawed fingers that raked across the dead earth. Beneath the glowering black-veined moon, the ruins of an old chapel, long since defiled, hunched like a broken beast amidst a field of graves. There, upon stones slick with centuries of decay, the blood dragons assembled, drawn by the call none could deny. Sir Draven the Relentless stood first among them, a towering figure in battered crimson plate, his presence a weight upon the crumbling earth. His helm, shaped like a snarling wolf's maw, hung at his side, revealing a face as cold and cruel as polished granite. Scars, both old and new, etched his cheeks like the map of 1,000 battlefields. In his gauntleted fist he clutched the blood rune, an obsidian shard pulsing with a dull red light, each throb a command from the ancient lord they all revered, Abhorresh. One by one, the others came. Lady Vasa, the silent blade, emerged from the fog like a wraith, her armor as dark as the spaces between stars, trimmed only with the faintest glimmer of silver. Her black hair was bound in intricate braids, each one adorned with tiny charms, trophies from foes who never saw her blade until it parted their souls from flesh. Her eyes, pale and merciless, flickered to Draven and offered the barest nod of respect. Lord Gorath Ironfang stomped into the clearing next, a giant even among vampires. His armor, a patchwork of salvaged plate and cursed sigils, clanked with each ponderous step. His axe, larger than most men, rested against his shoulder, stained a deep brown from dried blood that no amount of scrubbing would ever remove. Gorath's face was half hidden behind a twisted iron mask, the one concession to vanity he allowed himself after a duel that left his jaw shattered and grotesquely fused. Brother Malrich, once a knight, aspirant, before death reshaped his destiny, slithered from the gloom. Unlike the others, Malrich wore little in the way of armor, favoring speed and precision over brute force. His blackened blade, thin and cruel as a serpent's fang, hung low at his hip. His skin was taut over wiry muscle, and his smile was a jagged thing, promising suffering. Behind them followed others, lesser blood dragons, seeking glory and survival both. But it was these four who bore the mark of true greatness, or at least the potential for it. The blood rune flared violently in Draven's hand, casting gory light over their gaunt faces. The voice came then, ancient and terrible, vibrating through the marrow of their bones. "Come, my children of war, seek the castle of black mist. The blood tide rises. Only the worthy shall drink of immortality. Only the strong shall carve the path of kings." As the echo faded, the ground beneath the ruined chapel cracked and groaned. With slow, ponderous violence, a pathway of broken stones erupted from the earth, stretching into the mist-choked woods beyond. No mortal eye could have seen it. Only those who bore the blood runes could walk the path to the castle of black mist. Without a word, Draven donned his wolf-maw helm. The others followed in grim procession, their bootsteps heavy with destiny. The road was no mere path of travel. It was a gauntlet. Within the first hour, the mists thickened until even vampire eyes struggled to pierce it. The air grew wet and foul, carrying the stink of rotted flesh and something deeper, fouler, the reek of old, patient hate. They were not alone. Shapes stirred within the fog, whispering and giggling like insane children. Faint lights bobbed ahead, will-o'-the-wisps, false beacons meant to lure the unwary into death traps. Several of the lesser blood dragons were the first to stray, drawn like moths to the false stars. Their screams were wet and sudden. From the darkness lunged things. Not men, not beasts, but revenants of the damned. Skeletal warriors whose bones dripped black ichor, wielding rusted blades and wearing shreds of burial shrouds. They moved with jerky spasms, shrieking hatred from hollow mouths. Sir Draven met the first wave without hesitation. His great sword, Grave Cleaver, hissed through the air, splitting a revenant from skull to pelvis in a spray of rotten gore. Another leapt at him, its ribcage yawning like a beast's maw, and he smashed it apart with the pommel of his sword, sending splintered bones ricocheting into the mist. Lady Vasa fought with eerie grace, her twin daggers flashing like silvered comets. She weaved between clawing hands and snapping jaws, leaving severed heads and limp torsos in her wake. Her face remained expressionless, save for a single, contemptuous twitch of her lip as she opened a revenant's throat in a single, fluid slash. Lord Gorath waded into the thickest mass of the dead, swinging his axe in wide, crushing arcs. Each blow reduced bodies to wet pulp, the sheer force of his strike sending shockwaves through the mire. A skeletal warrior leapt onto his back, raking bony claws across his armor. Gorath merely reached over his shoulder, tore the thing free by its spine, and smashed it into the ground until it was nothing but a wet stain. Brother Malrich danced and darted, moving with unnatural speed. His blade flickered in and out like a serpent's tongue, piercing eyes, throats, and hearts with surgical precision. He laughed as he fought, a ragged, joyous sound that sent chills even through his companions. By the time the mist withdrew, the ground was littered with the broken dead. Bones crunched underfoot as the blood dragons resumed their march, unhurried and unflinching. They pressed onward through the cursed woods, where trees grew twisted and black, their branches hung with nooses swaying in a wind none could feel. From the branches dangled corpses, both ancient and fresh, their eyes following the travelers with mindless, vengeful hatred. Some twitched as the vampires passed, straining against invisible bonds, gurgling broken curses. Yet none of the blood dragons faltered. They were creatures of death, tempered in 1,000 battles, and no trickery of lost souls would break them. The path steepened, winding into the foothills, where the ground bled a viscous, dark fluid from unseen wounds. Ahead, rising like the jagged fang of some titanic beast, the first sight of their destination loomed, the castle of black mist. It was vast and hideous, a fortress seemingly carved from the very bones of the earth. Towers bent at impossible angles clawed the sky, and black clouds circled its highest spires like vultures. Lightning flickered within the clouds, casting glimpses of crumbling battlements and gates festooned with skulls. The castle's gates yawned open, waiting, a mouth ready to devour all who dared enter. The blood dragons halted atop a ridge, their figures framed by the blood-drenched moon. They gazed upon the ancient fortress in silence, each knowing the road ahead would demand more than even their monstrous strength. It would demand their very souls. And still they smiled, for they were blood dragons, and the path of blood was the only road they had ever known. Chapter 2. The Oath of Blades. The fire sputtered in the crumbling heart of the dead forest, its flames clawing hungrily at the damp night air. It burned low and sickly, fed on wood too rotten to catch easily, casting only a sullen red glow over the gathered blood dragons. Around it, shadows seethed, alive with unseen things, but none dared cross into the sanctum the vampires had carved with blood and steel. They sat in a broken circle, their armor scoured by battle and their cloaks soaked with the mist and gore of the road. The night pressed heavy upon them, thick with the stink of rot and the iron tang of old blood. The Draven the Relentless stood first, his battered crimson plate shedding flecks of dried marrow with every subtle movement. Gravecleaver, his monstrous blade, was thrust into the dirt before him like a grave marker. His helm lay at his feet, and his pale, scarred face caught the guttering firelight in a way that made the shadows stretch unnaturally across his features. He spoke, his voice a low rumble, resonating through the hollows of the cursed woods. Brothers, sisters, kin of the blood, we stand on the threshold of a new dominion. A tide of death that will sweep the world clean. Only the strongest will be given the right to stand at Nagash's side. Only the worthy will taste the blood of the new age. He dragged a heavy iron dagger across his palm, the black blood of the vampire welling thick and viscous. Without flinching, he let it drip into the earth. Tonight, by blood and by blade, we swear the oath of blades. The others followed, each cutting deep into their pale flesh, letting their corrupted lifeblood mingle with the soil. The ground hissed as it drank, a low susurration of thirst fulfilled. Each shall speak of their greatest duel, Draven continued. Each shall bear the truth of their strength. No lies, no boasts, only victory, only death, only the proof of our right to ascend. The vampires nodded grimly. To lie here was to die. To show weakness was to invite destruction. Lady Vashi the Silent Blade was the first to rise. She moved with a grace that seemed almost to glide, the shadows folding lovingly around her as she stepped into the firelight. Her armor, dark and sleek, whispered against itself with every movement. From the folds of her cloak she drew a thin dagger, its blade so finely honed it caught the firelight and shattered it into motes of dying color. Without ceremony, she began. In the Moonblade Rebellion, I hunted Eltharion Althendris, swordmaster of Hoeth. His blade was swift, his honor unyielding. They sent him to kill me, thinking my death would collapse the rebellion. They were right. Her lips curled in a smile that was not a smile. He found me in the ruins of Letharos, where the stones still remembered songs older than men. We circled each other for hours, blades singing, feet silent. The first cut he dealt me here. She brushed her hand lightly over a fine scar beneath her collarbone. It was shallow, deliberate. He wanted to wound my pride first. Her voice hardened. I answered by removing his left eye. The fire crackled as if in approval. We fought from sunfall to sunup. He tired. I did not. When he faltered, I slipped my blade beneath his ribcage and tore upward, carving his heart free. His blood sang as it spilled, sweeter than any I had ever tasted, and when his people found him, they found only ruin and a warning carved into the stones in his own blood. She knelt, pressing the point of her dagger into the earth in silent offering, then returned to her place. There was a beat of silence before Lord Gorath Ironfang rose like a collapsing mountain. He spoke in a voice like grinding stone. My tale is a dead man's gate. His massive axe thudded into the earth, a heartbeat of finality. A fortress of men, proud and thick with knights of Britannia. They thought walls would save them from death. They thought steel and prayers could shield them. He chuckled, a sound like stones breaking beneath a glacier. I stood alone against their gate, a battering ram made flesh. They poured arrows, poured boiling oil, poured faith upon me. None stopped me. My axe drank deep of their defenses, drank of their flesh. When their walls cracked, I led my own dead into the breach, knights of old who had sworn to other kings now bowing only to my will. He pulled a strip of flesh-colored leather from a pouch at his side and tossed it into the fire. It hissed and blackened instantly. With a piece of the banner I took from their broken hall, he growled. Now ash, as all their dreams became. Gorath sank down again, the ground shuddering under his weight. Brother Malrich rose last, slow and sinuous, his blackened blade glinting like a serpent's fang in the firelight. He bowed mockingly to the others before speaking. Mine is a simpler tale, a personal one. He traced a line along his own throat with the tip of his blade. My master, Sir Volric of the Iron Order, once called me pup and whelp. His contempt was endless. I bled for him, killed for him, waited for the day when the strength of my arm would match the hatred in my heart. Malrich's grin stretched wider, grotesque in the shifting light. Only, under a harvest moon, I challenged him. The others laughed. A fledgling against a warlord. A joke. He laughed too. A wet, rasping thing. We fought on the black cliffs above the river Sarn. His sword broke my arm. His boot shattered my ribs. Still I rose. I buried my dagger beneath his breastplate and tore his still-beating heart free with my teeth. He held up his blade, and for a moment the others thought they saw a blackened, shriveled lump impaled on its point, a relic or a trophy. Malrich sat down with languid grace, his grin never fading. Around the fire, the blood dragons sat in silence, the mist swirling tighter, whispering along the edges of their consciousness. The night shuddered around them, and from the darkness came the low, satisfied growl of something ancient and approving. The oath was sealed. Each vampire had bared their soul in blood and steel. Each had proven their right to stand among the chosen. Above them, the blood-soaked moon continued its pitiless vigil, watching as the blood dragons rose as one, their blades held high, their hearts beating with the slow, inevitable rhythm of the grave. The road to the castle of black mist awaited, and ahead greater battles still, but tonight, by the fire of the dead, they had bound themselves together in the oldest way known to their kind. By the oath of blood, by the oath of blades. Chapter 3. Sir Draven's Tale. The Fall of the Iron Knight. The fire guttered low as Sir Draven rose, the blood-crusted plates of his armor grinding together like the grinding of tombstones. The mist seemed to pull back from him, as though even the restless dead feared to brush against his shadow. He stood tall, grave cleaver planted before him, and gazed into the fire, his hollow voice carrying over the flickering embers. "Hear now the tale of Middenstag," he said, and the night itself seemed to lean closer. Middenstag had been a fortress, proud and ancient, carved from the bones of the hills by the first barons of the empire. It perched like a hunched beast over the winding Sighs River, its towers bristling with steel and banners of crimson and gold. At its heart ruled Karl von Hergen, the Iron Knight, renowned across the provinces for his unbreakable oaths and the cruel justice he meted with his blade, Silverwrath. When the armies of undeath came against Middenstag, the Iron Knight did not flinch. His soldiers fought with the desperation of men who believed the gods watched them, but their prayers turned to screams as the night dragged on and the dead pressed closer. Waves of skeletons and rotting corpses hurled themselves against the gates, only to be shattered against walls lined with burning oil and serried ranks of crossbowmen. But death cannot be denied forever. And Draven had not come merely with the mindless dead. He had come for blood. He had come for the Iron Knight himself. Beneath the black of a moonless sky, Draven and his chosen warriors breached the sewers of Middenstag, wading through filth and the drowned dead, their crimson armor slick with the stinking waters. Rats fled before them, squealing in terror. Above, the fortress shuddered with the endless percussion of war, the roar of trebuchets, the clash of steel, the thunder of men dying in droves. Emerging into the keep's lower halls, Draven found the first resistance, household guards still loyal to von Hergen. They charged, shouting prayers to Sigmar, their halberds gleaming under the flickering torches. Draven met them without breaking stride. Grave cleavers sang a single, brutal note as it sheared through steel and bone alike. One guard was split from shoulder to hip, his innards steaming into the cold air. Another thrust his halberd in desperate hope, but Draven caught the shaft in one gauntleted hand, wrenching it aside with the damned skull beneath his iron-booted heel. The halls became a river of blood. His warriors tore through the defenders like wolves among sheep, leaving only broken bodies and shattered hopes in their wake. The walls wept crimson as the tide of undeath rose within Middenstag's very heart. In the throne room, beneath banners heavy with dust and forgotten glories, Draven found Karl von Hergen waiting. The Iron Knight was everything the legends claimed. Tall, broad-shouldered, his burnished plate etched with scenes of victory and piety. His great sword Silverwrath pulsed with a glow of enchantments older than the Reiksguard itself. His face, weathered by war, bore the grim determination of a man who knew he faced death and chose to meet it standing. "Vampire!" von Hergen growled, voice like gravel dragged over steel. "You will find no easy victory here." Graeve said nothing. He only raised Gravecleaver and stepped onto the blood-slick floor. The Iron Knight attacked first, a roaring whirlwind of blade and shield. Silverwrath carved arcs of white fire through the gloom, each stroke a master's death blow. Draven parried the first, dodged the second, felt the third slice a deep gouge across his side, sizzling against his cursed flesh. Pain. Glorious, searing pain. He reveled in it. With a snarl, Draven retaliated. Gravecleaver met Silverwrath in a clash that shook the stones, sparks vomiting into the air like a fountain of stars. Draven pressed forward, blows raining down with relentless, monstrous force, but von Hergen was a fortress unto himself, absorbing, turning, countering with the patience of a man who had spent his entire life killing. The duel raged for what felt like hours, both combatants bleeding, both bodies failing in tiny ways, an inch slower here, a breath heavier there. And then came the betrayal. From the shadowed archways of the throne room emerged von Hergen's last secret. The Black Templars. A cadre of witch hunters and assassin priests sworn to the Iron Knight alone. Garbed in soot-black plate, they moved like wraiths. Crossbows loaded with blessed silver bolts aimed at Draven's heart. The vampire roared in fury. Bowsman. One punched through the gap beneath Draven's arm, shattering rib and puncturing long-dead lung. Another grazed his thigh, spraying black ichor across the marble floor. Von Hergen charged. Silverwrath held high to deliver the killing blow. But Draven was no mortal man. With a surge of monstrous strength, he hurled Gravecleaver aside and caught Silverwrath's blade in both hands, the sanctified steel burning into his palms. He wrenched the blade aside and drove his armored forehead into von Hergen's face with a sickening crack, splintering bone and sending the knight staggering. Before the Black Templars could reload, Draven moved. He ripped a fallen guard's spear from the blood and flung it like a javelin, impaling one of the Templars through the throat, pinning him to the wall like a grotesque butterfly. Another he reached in a blur, tearing his head from his shoulders in a single brutal wrench, tossing the twitching corpse aside like refuse. The remaining Templars broke and ran, fear overcoming oaths. The throne room echoed with the clatter of their retreat. Paul von Hergen rose to his knees, blood pouring from his shattered nose, his breastplate dented inward where Draven's blow had landed. Still, he glared up at the vampire, defiant to the last. "Do it, monster," he spat. "But know this, you will never." Gravecleaver silenced him. Draven retrieved his sword with one smooth motion and brought it down in a sweeping arc, shearing von Hergen's head clean from his shoulders. Blood erupted from the ruin of the knight's neck, a dark geyser that painted the cracked marble and the ancient banners alike. The Iron Knight's body toppled backward with the finality of a crumbling tower. Silence claimed the throne room. Draven knelt and claimed Silverwrath, the blade still thrumming with desperate dying magic. He plunged it into the cold stone of the dais, leaving it there as a marker, a warning. and a trophy. Strength, he murmured to the dead halls, is all that matters. Behind him, the fortress of Middenstag burned. Its defenders died screaming in the streets, their oaths forgotten in the face of blood and terror. Draven rose from the firelight as he finished his tale, grave cleaver hissing free of the earth once more. The gathered blood dragons watched him in reverent silence, the fire casting him in the image of a war god born of hate and ruin. The mist closed tighter around them. The path to the castle of black mist beckoned, and the memory of the Iron Mouse fall burned hotter than the dying embers. Chapter 4. Lady Vasa's Tale, The Silent Death. The fire writhed low, a dying beast suffocating in its own smoke. Around it the blood dragons sat like statues hewn from night itself, their gleaming eyes reflecting the embers' sickly light. The mist curled and danced about their feet, whispering half-formed words to the listening dark. Lady Vasa rose without a sound. Her movements were a symphony of silence, her dark armor absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. A glint of silver caught the firelight, the slender hooked dagger she wore at her hip. She stepped into the circle, every line of her bearing cold, regal, and poised to kill. She inclined her head ever so slightly, a queen bestowing audience. Then she began. "The Moonblade Rebellion," she said, her voice like silk drawn across a blade. A brief, glorious folly. The Asur sought to reclaim lands they deemed tainted by death. They sent their best, warriors of Hoeth, archmages cloaked in starlight, even those rare few who mastered both blade and spell. She smiled faintly, though it was an expression more akin to the twitch of a predator's lip before it strikes. Among them was Altharian Lariel, swordmaster and scion of one of the oldest houses of Seferi. A master of 1,000 forms, it was said that he could sever a falling raindrop without disturbing the air around it. The fire snapped, as if in response to the name. Vasa began to move as she spoke, circling the fire, letting her dagger trace idle patterns in the mist. "Masenta kill me, to silence the rebellion's heart, and so I gave him his chance." The scene came alive in her words. They met in the ruins of Lith Anael, once a proud Asur settlement, now a graveyard of white marble and shattered dreams. The moon hung bloated and crimson above them, staining the broken columns and fallen statues with bloodlight. Vasa waited amid the ruined pillars, her cloak blending into the shadows, her blades whispering hunger. Altharian approached without fear. He was radiant, silver armor gleaming, his rune blade sheathed in a scabbard etched with wards that shimmered as he walked. His steps made no sound against the cracked marble, and his eyes burned with the serene fire of certainty. They bowed to one another, a perfunctory gesture, acknowledging the grim sanctity of the duel. No words were exchanged. The first strike came faster than mortal eyes could follow. Altharian blurred forward, his blade a sliver of moonlight aiming straight for Vasa's heart. But Vasa was not there. She moved like mist, flowing aside with a grace that made the air shudder. Her own daggers flashed out, a feint to the throat, a true thrust to the inner thigh where the armor's seams were weakest. Clang. Hiss. Sparks bloomed as blade met blade, steel kissed steel. They circled, feet whispering over stone, blades singing a song no bard could ever capture. Altharian pressed her hard, his form a dazzling array of strikes, counters, and ripostes, the dance of a warrior born to elegance. But Vasa was death distilled. She gave ground, only to lead him deeper into the ruins, where shadows writhed thick and the broken columns crowded close. Step by step, she lured him. Altharian, sensing her retreat, pressed harder, his strikes gaining the desperate rhythm of a predator who knows the prey is within reach. He never saw the tripwire she had set, fine as a spider's thread, coated with the blood of the recently dead. His foot caught, only for a heartbeat, but a heartbeat was all she needed. Vasa struck like a viper. Her dagger slid under his raised guard, puncturing the joint beneath his left pauldron. A mere pinprick compared to the blows they had traded, but she drove the blade deeper, twisting, severing tendons, crushing nerves. Althariel staggered, his sword arm faltering. He roared in rage and spun, his rune blade carving a silver arc toward her throat. Vasa dropped to one knee, the blade passing inches above her head, and drove her second dagger into the soft flesh just above his greave, deep into the muscle of his calf. The swordmaster collapsed, one leg refusing to obey. Even then, even bleeding, he fought with a fury that shook the heavens. He lashed out, blade flashing, catching Vasa's shoulder, carving through leather and flesh to the bone. Pain flared, white-hot, blinding. But Lady Vasacia embraced the pain as an old lover. She stepped into his guard, chest to chest, eyes locked, and with emotion so delicate it seemed almost tender, she slid her first dagger into the hollow beneath Altharian's jaw and up, through the roof of his mouth, into the brain. The light died from his eyes like stars swallowed by a black hole. I don't think I shall ever be done, letting out a sob of despair. Altharian Lariel sagged against her, his weight a final, defeated confession. She eased him to the ground, her blood mingling with his, staining the sacred stones. In the silence that followed, she knelt beside him, closing his eyes with blood-stained fingers, an old, strange courtesy. "Your song ends here," she whispered. Then she rose, and from the folds of her cloak drew a vial, black as midnight, pulsing with necromantic energies. She poured it over Altharian's corpse, and the marble beneath him cracked and wept black tears as his body withered and was drawn into the stone itself, forever sealing his defeat into the ruins he had sought to reclaim. Vasa stopped circling and came back to stand before the fire. Her armor, though undamaged, seemed to whisper the memory of blood. "The Asher wept for them," she said with a voice of iron and ash. "They built a cairn of white stones and sang dirges for days. But the rebellion lived. Their grief became my blade." She plunged her dagger into the earth, the soil hissing and curling as if in pain. The blood dragons watched her in silence, reverence and hunger mingling in their undead hearts. Even among their kind there was something terrible and perfect about her, a ghost of death that even the proudest living warriors could not escape. The fire burned lower still, as if in mourning, and the mist coiled tighter, whispering her name to the darkness. Lady Vasa returned to her place without a word, her shadow stretching long and thin across the blood-soaked ground. And the oath of blades grew stronger still. Chapter 5. Lord Gorath's Tale, The Siege of Dead Men's Gate. The fire sagged low, its light little more than a dying gasp against the consuming mist. Yet as Lord Gorath Iron Fang rose, the flickering embers seemed to shudder into greater life, as though fearing to displease him. His armored form loomed immense and brutal, a monolith of blood-stained iron and battered bone. The axe slung across his broad back hissed against the night air, eager for remembrance. Without flourish or preamble, Gorath spoke, his voice a rumble of stone grinding against stone. "Dead Men's Gate," he said. "That cursed slab of stone was no fortress. It was a tomb waiting for corpses." The blood dragons leaned closer, their still hearts straining against the silence. It stood alone in the gray marches, a weather-eaten relic, its walls crumbling, its towers half devoured by rot and time. The fools of Bretonnia thought it a strategic prize, a bastion to hold against the rising dead. They sent their knights, 1,000 strong, all gleaming in gold and cobalt, banners snapping like the pride of gods. A bitter chuckle escaped Gorath's cracked lips. I commanded 60 thralls, and the corpses of whatever peasants still twitched in the fields. Barely enough flesh to mark a real garrison, but flesh enough for what I intended. The Bretonnians came at dawn, a tidal wave of steel and oaths, lances glittering like spears of light. Their horns brayed anthems of virtue, their priests chanted hymns that fouled the very air. Gorath stood atop the shattered walls, watching them come, his armor blackened by the blood of the night's work, his axe resting across his shoulders. Beneath him, the gates of Dead Men's Gate sagged inward, held together by nothing more than rust and stubborn spite. He did not fortify. He did not retreat. He prepared to drown them. The first charge came like a storm. Bretonnian knights, mounted on destriers clad in barding of chased silver, hurled themselves at the gates. The walls shook with their impact, dust and bone raining from the heavens. The gates splintered. The knights flooded in, a river of righteousness. Gorath met them in the courtyard. The first knight, resplendent in a tabard emblazoned with a golden stag, lowered his lance and thundered toward him. Gorath stepped aside with deceptive speed, his massive frame moving like a landslide given wicked intent. His axe swung once, a lazy, contemptuous blow that struck the knight across the chest. Steel shrieked. Bones shattered. The Bretonnian was torn from his saddle, his body flailing bonelessly through the air before crumpling against the courtyard stones, a ruin of meat and armor. The second knight fared no better, nor the third. The courtyard became a charnel pit. The ground drank their blood greedily, turning the dirt into a viscous, sucking mire that pulled at boots and hooves alike. Gorath moved through it all like a god of ruin, his axe carving broad swaths through knights and footmen, shields shattering like rotten bark under the weight of his fury. But still they came, hundreds of them, climbing over their dead comrades, screaming prayers and curses, stabbing, slashing, clawing for purchase. And Gorath endured. For 3 days and 3 nights the siege raged. The walls fell. The towers collapsed. The very stones of Dead Men's Gate groaned and wept under the relentless tide. Gorath's thralls were torn apart again and again, patched back together from the remains of the fallen, grotesque mockeries of the living and the dead. Arrows blackened the skies, lances shattered upon rusted iron, sword met axe, and axe fed on sword. By the second night, Gorath's armor was a ruin, plates hanging by threads of sinew and iron, his flesh beneath pulped and punctured, yet his eyes, those pitiless molten coals, burned ever hotter. He knew he could not hold forever, but he did not need to. On the dawn of the 4th day, when the Bretonnians breached the final keep and surged into the inner sanctum, they found Gorath standing alone atop the altar of the gate's ancient chapel, a beast crowned in the red mist of slaughter. And then he unleashed his final horror. With the last strength of his blood magic, he tore open the veil between life and death. He called to the dead littering the fields, to the broken bodies rotting in the ruins. He pulled them back screaming from the abyss. The knight's own dead brothers rose among them, their once shining armor fouled and broken, their once proud faces hollow and weeping rot. Panic fractured the Bretonnian lines like a hammer against glass. Knights turned on knights, driven mad by the faces of their fallen kin. Horses screamed as the dead dragged riders from their saddles. Blades hacked and tore, not at the enemy, but at phantoms only the damned could see. Gorath descended from the altar like a reaper at harvest. His axe drank deep and deeper still, until even the stones ran black with lifeblood. By nightfall, no living soul remained within Dead Men's Gate. Only Gorath and his new army. The Bretonnian dead, once so proud, so pure, stood in ragged ranks beneath the shattered banners of their houses, eyes empty, mouths slack. Gorath forged them anew, knights, squires, lords, all twisted into his personal legion of death, their oaths shattered, their honors stripped, their corpses bound by his will alone. The Bretonnians called it a massacre, Gorath rumbled, his voice low and triumphant. They call the place cursed now. No knight will set foot there, no priest will bless its soil. He dragged his axe free of the ground, the metal weeping black ichor. But to me, it is consecrated, a monument to endurance, to brutality, to truth. He turned from the fire, the light casting a monstrous shadow across the gathering. No one spoke. No one dared. For in Gorath, they saw not merely strength, but the unbreakable will that could grind worlds to dust if only given time. The mist thickened, swirling about the blood dragons like a great coiling serpent. Above them, the blood moon bled across the heavens, and the oath of blades grew darker still. Chapter 6. Brother Malrich's Tale. The Betrayal at Red Hollow. A fire slithered low, reduced now to little more than a core of sullen embers, casting the gathering of blood dragons into a twilight of moving shadows and shifting forms. Around it, the mist pooled thicker, heavy with the scent of old blood and broken oaths. Brother Malrich rose, slow and languid, the tattered edges of his cloak brushing the scorched earth. His lean, wiry frame seemed almost insubstantial against the bulk of Gorath or the iron gravitas of Draven, but there was something about him, something coiled and venomous, waiting to strike. His smile was a jagged scar in the gloom as he spoke. "Red Hollow," he said, his voice a low, mocking purr. "The place where loyalty dies screaming." He knelt by the fire, long fingers playing idly with the ash, smearing it into broken, chaotic runes. "I was once the favored of my master, Sir Aldred the Scarlet, blood dragon of the old line. I wore his colors, carried his banners, slew his enemies. I bled for his honor. I killed in his name. I believed, foolishly, in brotherhood." The embers cracked, sending a gust of red sparks swirling upward like a silent scream. Red Hollow was a forsaken place, a shallow basin ringed by dying trees and choked by the stench of stagnant waters. In the days of men, it had been a battlefield, a place of forgotten banners and broken bones buried under thin, sour earth. Now it was simply dead. Sir Aldred had called for a test of worthiness, a ritual of ascension, he had whispered, a moment to prove Malrich's readiness to join the true-blooded ranks of the blood dragons. Malrich had come, blade oiled, armor freshly lacquered, heart hammering with something like hope. He found no ceremony awaiting him. The betrayal. From the blackened woods surrounding the hollow came shapes, cloaked assassins in the colors of rival vampire orders, the Lamian serpents, the Strigoi beasts, even the flesh-crafted horrors of the necrarchs. Enemies Malrich had fought in Aldred's service now turned loose upon him like hunting dogs. A trial by blood and by treachery. The first assassin struck from the mist, a glittering shard of poisoned steel arcing toward Malrich's throat. He twisted aside, feeling the blade slice a shallow cut along his jawline, hot blood seeping instantly. He retaliated in kind, his blackened sword flashing in a vicious backhand that tore the attacker's throat open in a wet, arterial spray. More came. They'd poured from the mists like carrion flies, swords and claws and fangs gleaming under the corpse light of the gibbous moon. Malrich fought. He fought with the desperation of the betrayed, every strike a snarl of fury, every parry a scream of rage. His blade drank deep, tearing tendons, splitting skulls, carving through flesh as easily as cloth. The ground became a slurry of mud and blood, sucking at his boots as he whirled and struck. An alchemical bomb detonated beside him, shrieking with green fire. Shrapnel shredded his right arm from wrist to elbow, tendons hanging in slick cords, armor melted into his flesh. He drove through the agony, carving down the Necroc alchemist, who threw it with a thrust so brutal it drove the man off his feet and pinned him, twitching, to a tree. Another Larmian witch, clad in veils of blood and smoke, tried to entangle him with barbed chains. Malrich caught the chain mid-air and wrenched her forward, shattering her spine with the pommel of his sword before opening her throat with a contemptuous flick. The killing did not stop. It did not slow. It only deepened. At last, the hollow grew quiet, save for the rattling death gasps of the dying. Malrich stood alone amidst a sea of corpses, his armor shattered, his body a ruin of blood and torn sinew. His sword hung low in his fist, dripping black and red into the poisoned soil. And from the tree line, clapping slowly, emerged Sir Aldred. He wore no armor now, only a cloak of crimson trimmed with the bones of ancient foes. His blade, the worm-steel longsword Ashfang, gleamed hungrily in his hand. "You have done well, my whelp," Aldred purred, voice as oily as a priest's lies. "You have proven your worth." Malrich's vision blurred with blood and rage. "You betrayed me," he rasped. Aldred smiled, a patient, condescending thing. "Betrayal?" he mused. "No, Pop. I freed you. Brotherhood is a lie. Loyalty is a leash. Only through treachery do we shed our last mortal illusions. Only through betrayal do we ascend." He raised Ashfang in a lazy salute. "Come, little Malrich, shed your final weakness. Prove to me you are ready." The duel that followed was not the clean, elegant dance of courtly battles. It was savagery. Aldred moved with centuries of practiced malice, his strikes precise, honed to kill. Malrich, half mad from blood loss and rage, fought with a reckless primal fury, each blow fueled by betrayal, by pain, by the corpse of every hope he had once nursed. Ashfang cut deep across Malrich's ribs, slicing through flesh to expose glistening bone. Malrich answered by smashing the jagged remains of his sword's crossguard into Aldred's eye, blinding him with a spray of vitreous humor and blood. They circled, bleeding, snarling. Aldred stabbed for Malrich's heart. Malrich thought the blade against the remnants of his breastplate, the force of the blow driving him to one knee, but it gave him the position he needed. He lunged upward, driving the snap tip of his sword up through Aldred's armpit, through the gap in the master's guard. Aldred spasmed, gurgling, his strength spilling out in black torrents. Malrich twisted the blade savagely, ripping it free in a welter of shredded muscle and spurting gore. Sir Aldred the Scarlet staggered back, blood jetting from his ruined chest. Malrich advanced, silent as the grave, and with one final brutal motion he tore Aldred's head from his shoulders with his bare, blood-slicked hands. The body fell, spasming, into the sucking red mud of Red Hollow. Malrich stood over it, panting, broken, victorious, arid and utterly alone. He turned from the fire, his voice low and venomous. "Brotherhood," he spat into the dark. "A chain for the weak, a lie to cull the gullible." The blood dragons said nothing, their faces shadows in the mist. The embers of the fire hissed and crackled, struggling for breath as the night closed in tighter, and Brother Malrich sat once more, the bitterness in his heart blacker and deeper than ever. The oath of blades pulsed in the blood-soaked earth beneath them, binding them together not in loyalty, but in shared, terrible purpose. Chapter 7. The Cursed Path. The fire had burned itself down to ash, its final breath lost to the mist that now ruled the world. Around the blood dragons, the cursed night thickened, the fog curling in tendrils that groped at their armor and whispered against their senses. The time for tales had ended. The path awaited. Silent and grim, they rose as one, the blood oath binding them tighter than chains. Their weapons gleamed wetly in the half-light, slick with old blood and hungering for more. Without a word, Sir Draven led them forward, Gravecleaver resting across his broad shoulders like a scepter of execution. Lady Vasa drifted in his shadow, her blades whispering promises of swift death. Lord Gorath lumbered behind, a living siege engine, while Brother Malrich prowled the flanks, his blackened sword low and ready. The cursed path wound ahead of them, an ancient skeletal road half swallowed by black woods that seemed to grow thicker with every step. Gnarled trees twisted upward into the choking sky, their branches hooked and grasping, heavy with rot and the stinking remnants of long-dead travelers. The forest did not want them there. It made this abundantly clear. The first sign of true malice came as a soft, seductive glow weaving between the trees. A will-o'-wisp, its light pale and trembling like the last breath of a drowning man. Another answered it, then another, until the path ahead shimmered with a phalanx of ghost lights. The blood dragons paused. From the mists rose figures, wraithen, gaunt of limb and sharp of claw, their faces shrouded in veils of corpse-pale skin. They drifted just beyond the tree line, neither living nor fully dead, their eyes, if they had eyes, burning with a hungry, baleful light. Ghostly hunters, revenants of those who had tried and failed to tread this cursed path before. The air grew colder with each breath. The ground beneath their feet cracked and bled black ichor. With a snarl, Sir Draven gave the signal. The blood dragons attacked as one. Lady Vasa moved first, her daggers flickering through the gloom like falling stars. She slashed through a revenant's throat, but the thing simply shuddered and reformed, its flesh sloughing back into place with a wet, sucking sound. She did not falter, she adjusted. Her second strike came lower, severing the thing's spine with a whisper of steel. It collapsed, writhing, before she plunged both daggers into its shriveled heart. It screamed, a shriek that tore at the mind and dissolved into oily mist. Gorath roared and charged into the horde, his axe a reaping scythe. Spectral limbs and leering faces burst apart under the brutal force of his blows, the very air shuddering with each impact. Where his axe met bone and ectoplasm, reality itself seemed to rupture, swallowing the dead back into the abyss. Brother Malrich danced through the chaos, his blade moving too fast for the eye to follow. He severed hands reaching from the mist, lopped heads from twisted shoulders, impaling ghost flesh with brutal efficiency. His laughter rang out, high and feral, as he waded deeper into the storm of undeath. Sir Draven fought with grim efficiency, Gravecleaver howling through the mist, each strike sundering spirit and matter alike. He moved like a machine of murder, unrelenting, uncaring, carving a path through the impossible with raw, brutal certainty. The revenants screamed and howled, clawing and biting, trying to tear them apart, but the blood dragons were stronger, older, hungrier. For every specter that clawed its way into the material world, 3 more were torn apart by steel and hate. The battle raged without sound but for the clash of weapons and the howls of the dying. But the forest was not finished. The will-o'-wisps thickened, swirling into an eye-searing vortex of light. Shapes emerged from the heart of it, mockeries of knights, their bodies twisted and hollow, their armor blackened by ages of despair. They bore weapons formed from the bones of the damned, and upon their brows were crowns of thorn and flame. Night revenants, champions of the cursed path, with a roar, they charged. One knight smashed into Gorath, their swords meeting with a detonation of force that sent shockwaves rippling through the forest. Gorath bellowed, blood spraying from his torn mouth, but he stood his ground, pushing back against the tide. Another came for Vasa, a lance of twisted bone aimed at her heart. She ducked low, the lance scraping her pauldron, and in a single fluid movement she plunged a dagger up beneath the knight's helm. The revenant shuddered and froze, its body collapsing inward like a ruined marionette. Two fell upon Malrich at once, their blades a maelstrom of ghost fire and shrieking hate. He met them with the feral joy of a killer set free, his sword flickering between defense and offense, his body a blur of perfect violence. One fell to a slash that opened its chest to the spine. The other he pinned against a tree with a savage thrust, the spirit howling as it was impaled and burned from within. Draven faced the largest of them, a knight wearing a crown of frozen fire, his sword dripping with the weeping souls of the damned. Their clash was titanic. Blade met blade in howling crescendos of force. Gravecleaver sheared through the knight's shield, carving deep into his side. The revenant swung back, its cursed blade slicing Draven's shoulder to the bone, black ichor pouring from the wound. Snarling, Draven pressed forward, shrugging off the pain, using it to fuel his rage. He feinted high, then swept low, driving Gravecleaver through the knight's midsection in a torrent of ectoplasmic gore. The knight shrieked once, an endless, soul-rending sound, and exploded into a storm of ash and broken dreams. The mist recoiled. The path ahead cleared, though the forest still loomed, brooding and hateful. The blood dragons regrouped amid the carnage, their bodies battered, their armor shredded, but their eyes alight with the thrill of battle and the unholy bond it forged between them. They were fewer now. Some lesser kin had fallen, their corpses dragged screaming into the mist, but those who remained, Draven, Vasa, Gorath, Malrich, stood stronger for it. Together, bound not by trust, not by loyalty, but by the only truth their kind recognized, survival through blood. As they pushed forward into the deeper woods, the path wound ever upward, the mists growing thinner but the air thicker with menace. The castle of black mist loomed ahead, a dark wound upon the landscape. Their gauntlets tightened around their weapons. Their fangs bared in anticipation, and the cursed path behind them was littered with the ruins of those who had dared to stand against them. Chapter 8. The Castle of Black Mist. The cursed forest thinned at last, the ancient choking trees receding like a tide of skeletal hands clawing uselessly at the departing dead. Before the blood dragons, the land fell away into a yawning abyss, a chasm of blackened stone and swirling mists that reeked of death and despair. And beyond it, perched upon a jagged rise like a festering wound in the earth, loomed the Castle of Black Mist. It was a monstrous thing, neither truly built nor born, but rather conjured into existence by magic so foul and ancient they seemed to rot the very fabric of reality. Towers jutted at impossible angles, clawing upward as though trying to tear the bloated, black-veined sky apart. Ramparts twisted and writhed subtly, shifting when one was not looking, their stones pulsing like the flesh of a wounded beast. The battlements were festooned with skeletal remains, warriors, beasts, things not born of mortal wombs, each nailed in grotesque poses of mockery and warning. The drawbridge, a mass of rusted chains and broken planks, groaned and swayed above the abyss. Beneath it, the mists churned and whispered with 1,000 unseen mouths, the promises of forgotten gods lost to the hungry void. The blood dragons stood silent, the bitter wind tugging at their torn cloaks, tasting the malice that rolled from the castle like waves of invisible bile. Sir Draven stepped forward first, his booted foot thudding onto the groaning bridge. The others followed without hesitation, their weapons drawn, their senses sharpened to razors. As they crossed, the mists rose hungrily around them, trying to tug at their ankles, to drag them screaming into the endless dark. Whispers clawed at their minds. Promises, threats, memories better left buried. Brother Malrich smirked into the mist, his jagged teeth gleaming. Lady Vasa moved like a shade, her blades whispering a tune of silent defiance. Lord Gorath trudged forward, a wall of hate and iron that no ghost dared touch. And Draven moved with the inevitability of a storm. The castle gates loomed before them, an ancient arch of fused bone and twisted iron, the skulls of kings and monsters locked forever in silent screams. As the blood dragons approached, the gates shivered, an almost sentient motion before yawning open with a groan like a dying titan. Beyond, the halls of black mist awaited. The air inside was thicker, heavier, like wading into the bowels of a charnel pit. Every breath carried the tang of death, cloying, metallic and sweet. The walls themselves wept black ichor, trailing down mosaics of ancient battles now too decayed to recognize. Shadows moved independent of any light source, long-fingered and grasping. The blood dragons pressed on. They entered a vast hall, its ceiling lost in darkness, its floor a cracked mosaic depicting a sprawling battlefield littered with broken crowns and shattered swords. Massive pillars carved in the shape of writhing corpses held the weight of the oppressive gloom above. And they were not alone. Figures stood in the gloom. Vampires. Not blood dragons, no. These were of other lineages, other cursed bloodlines that had answered the summons of black mist. From the shadows stepped the pale sons of Neferata, their robes heavy with gold-threaded silk, their eyes slitted and gleaming with ambition. The Lamian vampires, with their venomous smiles and dagger-ready hands, slithered among them like cats in a field of crippled mice. Near the broken statues stood the twisted spawn of the necrarchs, their bodies deformed by centuries of blasphemous magic. Hunched and muttering, they reeked of alchemical taint, their fingers ending in sharpened claws meant for rending flesh and bone alike. Further still, near the crumbling balconies, brooded the monstrous strigoi. Hulking, feral things, their minds barely tethered to reason, their red eyes wide with eternal hunger. The air between these factions crackled with ancient hatred barely restrained. The blood dragons took their place without hesitation, a wall of crimson and iron. There was no fear among them, only the knowledge that they belonged here more than any of the others. Across the hall, a pair of von Karstein pretenders, tall, regal, but reeking of delusions of nobility, watched them with haughty disdain. Lady Vasa's lip curled in amusement. Malrich snickered openly. Lord Gorath cracked his knuckles, each pop a promise of violence to come. Above them all, high upon a cracked dais, loomed a throne of bone and black steel. It sat empty, but from it poured the cold authority of an ancient will, a hunger that made the strongest spirits in the room, the will of Avarish. A voice, neither living nor dead, echoed through the vastness. You have come, children of the night, drawn by blood, bound by death. The trials await. The path to supremacy is soaked in betrayal and bathed in blood. Only the strongest shall rise. Only the true shall endure. The hall shuddered as the last word faded, dust and bone raining from the rotting rafters. The blood dragons stood ready, weapons in hand, eyes ablaze with the certainty of killers who knew their worth. Around them the other vampires shifted, wary, bristling, sensing the beginning of something that could not be undone. The castle of black mist had opened its jaws, and soon it would feast. Chapter 9. The Trial of Blood. The throne of bone loomed over the vast, rotting hall, its silent authority settling across the gathered vampires like a leaden shroud. The blood dragons, still as carved effigies of war, stood among the other broods, the whispering Lamians, the warped Necrarchs, the feral Strigoi, and the preening von Karsteins. All eyes, black and burning, turned to the dais as the unseen will of Abarash pressed down upon them. The cracked marble beneath their feet pulsed with unseen life, whispering promises of glory and doom. And then the ground split. With a shriek of tortured stone, a great pit yawned open at the center of the hall, vomiting forth a miasma of rot and despair. From its depths rose a platform, slick with black ichor, upon which stood rows of ancient warriors, the champions of the Blood Oath. Their armor was rusted, but formidable, their flesh long since rotted away, leaving only malevolent spirits bound to bone and steel. Each one carried the weight of unnumbered slaughters, eyes burning with an unnatural, vengeful intelligence. A voice, hollow and pitiless, echoed through the hall. "Prove yourselves in blood, against the champions, against each other. Only those who survive may serve in the new dominion of death." No applause, no fanfare. Only the clash of wills sharpened to lethal edges. The trial of blood had begun. The first to move was a Necrarch, a withered sorcerer who hissed incantations even as he waded toward the skeletal champions. Runes burst to life around him, vomiting fire and shadow. One of the undead champions, a hulking knight encased in spiked plate, surged forward with an impossible speed. His flail, wrapped in chains etched with spells of despair, struck the Necrarch mid-incantation, reducing him to a shrieking cloud of gore and withered flesh. The hall erupted in motion. Swords flashed. Spells tore the air asunder. Claws ripped and fangs tore. The blood dragons moved as wolves among the flock. Sir Draven led the charge, grave cleavers splitting the first champion's skull with a blow that cratered the marble floor. Bone and cursed iron exploded in a geyser of black mist. He did not pause. He turned his blade into a sweeping arc, severing the spine of a Lamian, who dared try to backstab him in the chaos. Lady Vasa flowed like a phantom through the melee, her daggers carving out delicate, perfect deaths. A champion swung a maul at her with a force that would have pulverized stone. She ghosted beneath it and buried twin blades into the exposed vertebrae at the back of its neck, twisting until the thing collapsed into a puddle of writhing mist. Lord Gorath faced one of the greater champions, a massive thing in tarnished gold plate, wielding a greatsword etched with the names of 1,000 slaughtered foes. The two collided with an impact that shook the entire hall. Gorath roared, his axe carving deep gouges into the champion's armor, shearing away chunks of ancient steel like rotten wood. The champion answered with a blow that crushed Gorath's pauldron and split his flesh down to the bone. Gorath only laughed, a deep, booming sound, and drove his forehead into the champion's faceplate, caving it inward with a sickening crunch. With a final howl, he cleaved the champion in two from shoulder to hip, the sundered halves writhing before dissolving into ash. Brother Malrich was a blur of malice and speed, his blade tasting the blood of both the champions and the other vampires. A von Karstein noble confronted him with a snarl, rapier flashing in intricate courtly forms. Malrich parried each strike with savage ease before sliding under the noble's guard and driving his dagger into the base of the vampire's skull. The Karstein convulsed violently before collapsing, mouth agape in a silent scream. The hall was a maelstrom of death. Old rivalries ignited like dry tinder. A Lamian, cornered and desperate, unleashed a pulse of blood magic that vaporized 2 lesser blood dragons. Sir Draven saw her from across the chaos, his eyes locked onto hers, and in 3 long strides he was upon her. His sword licked out once, twice, and the Lamian crumpled, her severed arms thudding wetly to the ground, before Draven cleaved her head from her shoulders. Yet not all the blood dragons fared so well. Edric Haithman, once a proud knight among their number, fell to the spear tip of a champion that pinned him screaming to the floor. Before any could reach him, the ground itself split open beneath his body, dragging him into the yawning pit below, his screams dwindling into oblivion. Lady Vasa's second-in-command, the lean and brutal Sir Jorel, turned against Malrich in the chaos, blades flashing. Malrich, grinning wildly, danced around the flurry before catching Jorel's wrist, twisting and driving his own blade up through Jorel's ribs and into his black heart. The blood dragons knew then there could be no loyalty here. Only survival. Hours or lifetimes later, the storm of battle ebbed. The hall lay strewn with broken bodies, shattered weapons, and rivers of blood that ran ankle-deep. Of the dozens who had gathered at the start of the trial, only a ragged few remained. Among them, Sir Draven stood, blood steaming from rents in his armor, grave-cleaver dripping black ichor. Beside him, Lady Vasa wiped her daggers clean on the tattered cloak of a dead von Karstein. Lord Gorath leaned on his axe, his massive body a patchwork of fresh and ancient wounds, breathing like a wounded bull. Brother Malrich crouched on a fallen column, grinning wide enough to split his face, blood matting his dark hair to his skull. They were wounded there. They were battered, but they endured. Above them, the throne of bone pulsed with a deeper, darker power, as if acknowledging their triumph. And from the deepest shadows of the hall, something unseen stirred, vast and ancient, its hunger a pressure in the blood of every creature present. The survivors knelt as one, the iron chains of their oath tightening around their souls. The trial of blood was over, and only the true had survived. Chapter 10. A New Dawn of Darkness. The hall of the Castle of Black Mists lay in ruins. Splintered bones and shattered weapons choked the blood-slick floor, the bodies of the fallen reduced to little more than heaps of tattered armor and gnawed sinew. The mists that had once merely whispered now howled through the broken arches, carrying away the last gasps of the defeated. At the heart of it all the survivors stood. Sir Draven, Lady Vasa, Lord Gorath, Brother Malrich, and a pitiful handful of others, none unmarked by the carnage. They did not speak. There were no words for what had been endured, only the iron scent of blood, the marrow-deep ache of old wounds reopened, and the gnawing certainty that they had crossed a threshold from which no soul, however damned, could return. Above them, the throne of bone seemed to pulse, alive with a slow, terrible hunger. From the air itself bled a figure. It did not step from shadow. It was shadow, coagulating into the semblance of a man clad in the relics of a forgotten age. A tattered cloak, stitched with the banners of sundered empires, billowed from his skeletal frame, and his eyes, two pits of endless night, settled on the gathered survivors. Well, not the ancient vampire himself, but a fragment of his undying purpose, a shard of the monstrous force that had shaped the blood dragon's very souls. It spoke without sound, the words striking their minds like hammer blows against rotting wood. You who endure the trial, you are worthy. Their blood boiled in their veins, searing them from the inside, as the ancient magic sank its fangs into their very being. The figure raised a withered hand, and before each survivor appeared a chalice wrought of black iron and bone, overflowing with a thick, bubbling liquid darker than night, blood drawn from the well of endless hunger, mingled with the ichor of Abhorash's undying line. "Drink," the well commanded. And they did. Sir Draven seized the chalice without hesitation, the black blood spilling down his chin as he drank deep. His veins turned to molten iron, his scars burned white-hot, and visions of endless war and ruin flooded his mind. Lady Vasa lifted hers delicately, her eyes glinting cold fire, and sipped. Shadows clung tighter to her form, wrapping her in a mantle of perfect death. Lord Gorath drained his in a single pull, roaring as his muscles knotted tighter, his very bones thickening into weapons of war. Brother Malrich cradled his chalice like a lover, licking the blood from the rim with a cruel, eager smile. Madness danced in his eyes, tempered now by a cunning deeper and darker than before. The magic gripped them all, rooting itself in marrow and soul, bonds of loyalty woven not by trust, not by oaths sworn by trembling lips, but by the ironclad certainty of blood-forged dominion. The oath was complete. They were no longer merely vampire. They were weapons. The vision of Aberash's will faded, leaving behind only a resonance of hunger, a promise of wars yet to come. The blood dragons, fewer now but stronger, emerged from the crumbling gates of the castle of black mist, the cursed drawbridge groaning beneath their boots. Behind them, the fortress began to collapse in on itself, as though the earth itself sought to swallow the memory of what had transpired. Before them stretched the broken horizon of Sylvania, a landscape fit only for the damned. Beyond it, the vast, shuddering world of mortals, naive men building brittle empires, arrogant elves clinging to fading glories, stubborn dwarfs burrowing into dead stone, fertile ground for conquest. The blood dragons fanned out across the land, each a plague unto themselves, each a harbinger of ruin. Sir Draven rode west, his crimson banner unfurling against the night winds, seeking the heart of the empire to shatter its thrones and bleed its kings dry. Lady Vasa slipped southward, her footsteps as silent as the last breath of a dying prince, her daggers thirsty for elven hearts and their deluded arrogance. Lord Gorath turned east, where the dwarf stronghold still stood proud and unbroken. His axe itched to carve open the mountains and drown their vaults in gore. Brother Malrich drifted where the winds took him, a spectre of betrayal, leaving behind villages choked with their own blood, and lords whispering his name in horror. The tales they had shared around the fire, their duels, their betrayals, their triumphs, were mere prelude, whispers of greater horrors yet to be written. Blood would flow in rivers. Empires would crumble into dust. And upon the ruins, the blood dragons would carve their new dominion, a kingdom not of gold and lies, but of steel and death. The night swallowed their forms, and the world trembled at the coming of a new dawn. A dawn not of light, but of darkness. And it would never end.